Alright, welcome back to a new video. In this video I'm going to talk about my updated beliefs about the existence of God. In the last video I talked about about this topic. I talked about how I believed in a necessary existence. I don't know why I titled my videos I believe in God now, but that's more like I think that was more about attracting the attention because I just I didn't believe in a necessary being, specifically just in a necessary existence. But I'll make my stance more clear now because it's been refined. It's been, you know what I'm saying? It's been refined. Like my stance is now more clear. I wouldn't be confusing y'all like I did before, but let's get it. So what I think. So the earlier argument is that I thought that the universe was finite, right? This is what I said. No, there is a flaw with the argument. I said that the universe is finite. Therefore it has a beginning. Right? The universe is finite, therefore it has a beginning. Or the opposite, I say that the universe has a beginning, the expansion speed is finite, therefore the universe is finite. This argument is only valid if the space or the space, like what the universe constitutes of, like began at the Big Bang, at t equals 0. But the problem is that we can have infinite space. We can have an infinite number of points. Exactly at t equals 0, because what physicists usually think is not that it's like not that space expands from the sides, but it expands, like the distance between the points grows, just like a balloon when you fill it with air, right? So you place 2 points, the points expand, so it's the distance between 2 points that expand between the points. You can have an infinite points. You can have an infinite space at t equals 0. This is a problem. If it expands from the edges, it doesn't matter, I think, at that point, because I mean, if you have infinite points, then there is already probably infinite space, right? Because these points exist within the space. But if you have a finite space, then it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter whether the distance between the two. If you have a finite number of points, it doesn't matter if the distance between the points grows or the space grows from the sides. It's still gonna be finite, because any finite number, if you if you hit it or if you multiply it, if you multiply by a finite number, it's still a finite number. Yeah, so this is what I gotta say. It's still a finite number. So my argument was assuming a premise that is debated, that is not yet known with certainty, right? So I was assuming the premise that the universe at t equals 0 was finite to be true, though it's not been proven. It could have been infinite, it could have been finite. Yeah, so I said that nothing physical can exist outside of the universe. This is probably true. So it has to be a beginning, but the argument was basically that you cannot have an infinite set of contingent things. You cannot have an infinite set of dependent things. So if the universe has a beginning, then it must be caused. This is what I said, right? And you cannot have an infinite chain of dependent things. This thing caused this thing, this thing caused this thing. So there must be a foundation that is uncaused. But the problem with this, this framework or this argument, well, but before we get into it, I would talk about physicality, or not physicality. Before I get into the infinite regress, physicality means something is physical. It could be material, it could be immaterial. Material like made of matter, like the human body, or immaterial like black holes, like gravity. You know what I'm saying? Physical, but it exists within space and time. Now, the reason why I say non-physical, like necessary being is generally thought of as non-physical. But what about the necessary existence itself? Necessary existence doesn't have to be non-physical, does it? It could be physical. But how can something physical exist everywhere? This is the problem. Like, can it be physical? Can the necessary reality, not necessary existence? Because we are talking about two things here. We're talking about necessary reality and necessary being. And necessary being has to be non-physical. I mean, most theologians, most classical theists think this way because they believe God to be omnipresent. So something omnipresent cannot physically exist everywhere at once. That's a logical contradiction. So it has to be non-physical. If it's physical, in order for it to exist everywhere, it has to be infinite in size. But this is not what classical theists. When we talk about omnipresence, they're not talking about physical presence, even in the form of non-physicality. How can you exist everywhere still? I mean, they are not, when they say that they don't mean that like God actually he's outside of the universe. He's like, what can I say? He forms a border above around the universe, like he surrounds the universe. That's not what they mean when they say that. When they say that God is omnipresent, or in Islam, Muhit, when they say that Allah is Muhit, this is not what they mean. Not that He physically surrounds the universe, but that He is with you in knowledge. He is with you in what you do. Like everything that you do He is aware of it. That's because it's within His nature. Not that He doesn't need observation for that, to acquire that. It's within His nature to know everything that happens. So even though He's omniscient in the classical theism, He still updates his knowledge. For example, something that is in the future, it's updated once it happens. It's updated. It's updated as something that happens in the present, within the God's memory. You know what I'm saying? But the question that remains is: if a necessary being is usually seen as something that is non-physical or agreed upon by classical theists, then what about a necessary reality? What about necessary reality? Can it be physical? No, this is the problem, because what if one argues that physical things decay, that they cannot remain? Absolute immortality is a condition of a necessary existence, to exist everywhere, to exist at all times. But something physical cannot exist at all times. It cannot be absolutely immortal. What if someone argues that? Or it can be, I think it can be, from what I've seen. But this is a different question. This is what I'm asking. Can it be? Because I'm not just trying to give information. I'm also trying to raise questions. Anyways, I gotta look into this more. But let's get into the point I was trying to make about infinite regress. About infinite regress, I said that it was logically impossible. That's what I said in the previous video. But when I really looked into it, when I really analyzed the infinite regress argument, that you can have an infinite chain of dependencies, you usually give I saw some people, when they try to support the argument, they give the analogy of something like shooting, for example. If I want to shoot with a gun, I ask this person, they ask this person, they ask. Then if you have an infinite chain of events, like where this person has to ask this person, has to ask this person, it would never happen. So the action would never happen. But the problem with the universe is that it doesn't operate on will. Events do not operate on will, so they just happen. You get what I'm saying? So the analogy is not that great. But yeah, the counter arguments to this logical regress, to this infinite regress logical impossibility raised by Al-Ghazali and William Lane Craig, is basically that the argument assumes that you have to traverse an infinite set, but you don't have to, because in mathematics, how can we call it, like this set like the set negative infinity, zero exists in the set negative. You can have a set of negative infinity, zero exists there. You don't need to count every number from negative infinity. You don't have to traverse the entire set to reach 0. So the argument assumes that you have to traverse the entire set. Like you have to, it assumes there is traversal from negative infinity to 0. But negative infinity is not a point. It's not a point to traverse from. This is the problem. Negative infinity means there is no starting point. Because there are infinitely many, because there are infinite events before the present, right? So the thing that has to happen is that the cause of the universe has to be completed. That's what needs to happen. Just the cause of the universe. Not everything has to, not every event before the universe has to happen. Just the cause. If the cause before it happens, it's completed, sorry. Yeah, it happens or it's completed, and the universe would exist. Argument only applies if, the traverse only applies if there is a finite number of events before the present. But yeah, this is a counter argument. It assumes traversal, but you don't need traversal. So that's a counter argument. And there is now if you get into it more deeply, if we try to get into the topic more deeply, or the concept more deeply of infinite regress, we can have a consecutive number of causal chains, or we can have a simultaneous number of causal chains. And what I mean by consecutive causal chains or simultaneous causal chains, I would say that it's consecutive and simultaneous rather than number. I don't know why I said number, but I gotta correct myself from here. I'm trying to be precise. But we can have a consecutive causal chains, and we can have simultaneous causal chains. Consecutive causal chains means that this cause cannot happen if the previous cause is. It means that this cause does not depend on the previous cause, but it doesn't depend on the existence of the other cause. So, for example, the cause of this universe could cease to exist, but that doesn't matter, right? So, because this universe only depended on the previous on its cause for its existence. After this universe exists, it doesn't matter if the cause ceases to exist or not. This is what a consecutive causal chain means. Whereas a simultaneous causal chain what a simultaneous causal chain means is that every cause, if one cause ceases to exist, then every other cause would cease. Every effect would cease. If one cause ceases to exist, every other cause would cease to exist. For example, if I'm moving. For example, I'm moving an object, and this object moves another object, which moves another object. If I stop this object from moving, then everything will stop. So this is similar, you know what I'm saying, to the simultaneous causal chains. If one cause ceases to exist, then everything collapses. Now this makes the case for a foundation stronger. Though the foundation is a different debate, whether an infinite causal of chains, like something that is, for example, this thing is hanged to this thing is hanged to this thing infinitely. A lot of classical things, they assume that this cannot exist. It needs something. It needs like a foundation. It needs something that is one last thing that is hanged to upon everything. You know what I'm saying? Like that forms the foundation of everything. But a lot of philosophers, they criticize this idea. They think that there is no logical contradiction in infinite regress. So this thing can be hanged to this thing without requiring a foundation. And this is a different argument, whether we need a foundation or not. But this is just to say that I was too quick to say that infinite regress is logically impossible. But I don't think it's that clear. And this is the reason why. Anyways, so my current stance is basically that I'm a necessary, I believe in necessary existence. Though this belief is probabilistic, it doesn't have to be certain. This is similar to what I last said in my video when I talked about my belief about God, right? Or my current stance about God. I still don't believe in a God, to be honest. I believe in necessary existence. Even back then, I just for some reason used that title, I think, to grab attention only. Because even then I used to believe in a necessary existence, not a necessary being, to be honest. Because a necessary existence can be either a necessary reality or a necessary being. A necessary reality is something that we cannot imagine, but it's logically coherent. A lot of philosophers would say it's logically coherent. How can it cause? We don't know exactly, but since it doesn't have a will, but it's possible, like a non-physical universe, for example. Does it have to be physical? Maybe, yeah, I don't know. This is a question that I raised earlier, but yeah, so it can be either a necessary a reality or a necessary being. The question is, how would you know? So this is so this is where necessitarian agnosticism comes in, like my stance. This is what it is, like, you believe in necessary existence, but you don't know whether it's a necessary being or a necessary reality. Yeah, so this is still my current stance, to be honest. Now, if we talk about a necessary being, for instance, like, is that even a logically coherent concept? Like, is a necessary being a logically coherent concept? Because I can imagine a necessary being getting destroyed. But what a lot of philosophers would say that I'm not actually imagining a necessary being. What I mean by necessary being is a being that cannot fail to exist, that exists in all possible worlds. That is, this being is self-sufficient and dependent. And absolutely eternal. This is what I mean by a necessary being. But is that like a coherent concept? Because, as I say, I can imagine, but a lot of philosophers would say that you are imagining a contingent being instead. Or you're imagining the concept of self-destruction, not imagining it. I don't know, like, if this is coherent, because unlike the necessary truths we can imagine being false, they are it's logically impossible for them to be false. It's not the case with a being, with a concept. I don't know if I'm imagining this correctly, but this still raises the question whether a necessary being is a logically coherent concept. Even if it is, that doesn't mean it's actual, because when you look at the concept of God in classical theism, like, it's assigned, like, God is assigned like the maximal traits: omniscience, omnipotence. Omnipotence is not just one trait, it's the ability to do everything, having infinitely efficacious will. You know what I'm saying? So this is the ability to realize anything that is logically possible. We don't think, I mean, most philosophers agree on this definition, because once you include the logically impossible, then problems arise. For example, can this guy make 1 + 1 = 3? I mean, this is not possible, because if it violates logic. It violates arithmetic. There is no possible world in which this could be true. Every time you try to add something to something, it gives you two things. And even if you, in a possible world, for example, where a pair of things are one thing, then one individual object is no longer one thing. It's half a thing. So arithmetic is still obeyed. Logic is still obeyed. Yeah, this is the thing. But the problem with omnipotence and omniscience is that they can be argued for example, through the argument that a necessary being is a being with infinite potential. It's the greatest possible being, a being with infinite potential. There is nothing that is like better than it, superior than it. Therefore, any potential must be realized. Therefore, it is omnipotent. You know what I'm saying? It is omniscient. Now this is the argument. It's basically about the necessary being not being limited by anything external. It's not limited by anything external, and it's the greatest possible being. You cannot imagine something greater than it. Therefore, any potential must be realized, and this leads to maximal traits like omniscience, perfect knowledge, like having the knowledge of all truths. Omnipotence, being able to do everything that is logically possible. But these can be just limits of concepts. They don't have to be actual. Even if they're logically coherent, they don't have to be actual. Now there is modal omniscience and there is omniscience. Modal comes from modal logic. It includes possibilities, necessities. So we're no longer talking about what is actual, but what could be. Now the concept of omniscience, and there is standard omniscience, that is about the actual truth, knowing the actual truths that exist in a universe. Whereas the modal omniscience is about the truths that exist in multiple universes. If this is, you know what I'm saying? Multiple universes that could possibly exist. I mean, if these are actual, if these universes are actual, the universe that could possibly exist, possible worlds, and every truth that could have been but isn't. And it includes the actual truth as well, right? Could have been but doesn't exist, you know? So this is modal omniscience. Now the concept of omniscience in classical theism is not standard omniscience, just knowing the actual truth. It's omniscience in the strongest sense. Maybe it's not labeled explicitly as modal omniscience, but it's something closer to that. Based on the theologians' descriptions of the classical theist God, it's something closer to that. Includes like knowledge of everything that is logically, you know, possible, everything that could be, not just everything that is actual. The number of truth explodes, but whether it reaches absolute infinity, I don't think so. Because absolute infinity is more like a mathematical infinity, though there are different infinities in mathematics. I don't think this still approaches. I don't think this is absolute infinity, because it can be made like bigger. We can talk about the truth, the set of truths of these truths. Like, are these truths true? For example, you know what I'm saying? And we can go on an infinite regress chain. Are the truths about this truth true? You know what I'm saying? So we can create truths out of these truths. And there is also a problem if human or events and human actions are indeterministic. Like, is there any truth value? To know, this is where philosophers disagree. Like some philosophers, like classical thinkers, say, God knows this, knows even indeterministic events, even indeterministic actions, even, you know what I'm saying? So, because there is truth value to them. While some philosophers say that there is nothing to know, because there is no truth value until the thing has happened. Now this is like where the disagreement is. But about omnipotence. Like, how can you? I gave like the argument that is basically used by classical theists to argue for omnipotence, for God's omnipotence. But can you empirically prove it? Now this is the problem, because to prove that a being is omnipotent, you have to be omniscient, because you have to know everything that is logically possible yourself to test that being in everything that is logically possible. Not only that would take infinite time, because the number of logically possible things is infinite. So that would be unrealistic, and not only that would that take infinite time, but also like there is another problem. Like, you have to know, as I said, everything, right? So that requires omniscience. So you need an omniscient entity or an omniscient brain to verify that being is omnipotent. But how can you know that that omniscient entity or omniscient brain is truly omniscient? You need omniscience as well. Because how can you verify, how can you know every truth claim that exists and could exist? Or we just talk about actuality, because you don't need what could exist here. You can just know what exists, because like this God exists, like it has knowledge, so this knowledge has a true value. Either the knowledge is complete, so the being is omniscient, or it is incomplete, therefore it is not omniscient. So you need omniscience, right? So I mean, maybe you just need standard omniscience. But how can you verify that the mind or entity is omniscient? You need to know all the actual truth. Let's just constrain that actual truth. You need to know all the actual truth, and you need to know the truth, like the true value, right? So you would need omniscience again. Like, for example, you would know every single truth, and whether it is, you know what I'm saying, like every single statement, like they could exist, and its true value, with a true value, and you need to know its true value. So to verify whether that being or the entity or mind is truly omniscient, you need omniscience. And to verify whether that verifier or that omniscience is omniscient, you need omniscience, and omniscience, and so on, infinite regress. So we get to the conclusion that omnipotence and omniscience, they cannot be verified. They could be argued for. They don't have to exist in reality. They could just be the limits of concepts. You know what I'm saying? It could just be the power of imagination of the human mind. Because even when I think about the greatest possible being, I tend to reach something very close to classical theism. A being that is omnipotent, that is omniscient. I disagree about other traits like wisdom and benevolence, because I think these are more subjective. But anyways, and hard to argue for. So yeah, some are subjective. Benevolence, whether a benevolent God appears, thinks of his goodness is the same or our goodness if this being exists in the first place. Wisdom, how can you know what something is wisdom? We need to agree on is wise or not. We need to agree on the definition first, and we need to know all the intentions of this God. So there are problems to these things as well. But whether it's better than unwiseness, I don't know. And this is another problem. So it's not as clearly objective as omnipotence, like being better, for example, than being better, stronger abilities than non-omnipotence, or omniscience than non-omniscience. So yeah, this is the thing. Because the nature of God is not basically even in classical theism, is not maximality in every trait, but in every trait that is good. That confirms to the nature of God, right? For example, not in something like masculinity and all that, because this is a human trait, for example, so it doesn't apply to him. So everything that is within his nature is maximized. If that makes sense. So about the greatest possible being, so the problem is that even when I think of this concept, and I think that if everyone were to think about this concept, to imagine the greatest possible being, they would come to something very similar: omnipotence, omniscience, because they would try to maximize every trait. This shows more about the power of human imagination. It doesn't have to exist in reality. You get the point? So this being could exist or could not exist, but classical theists argue that it exists, that this being exists. Though we don't see any strong sign for the existence of such a being, it's an unfalsifiable claim. Anyways, one thing I would like to point out is that when we tend to think about perfection, we tend to, in terms of knowledge, for example, in terms of ability, being able to do everything, having knowledge of everything, we come to this omnipotence and omniscience, right? So concepts. This, you know what I'm saying? We usually arrive at these concepts. This could imply a lot of people they talk about perfection jokingly, but I would be honest to tell you that I want perfection for myself. I'm not trying to say that. To attribute perfection to a different being, to the creator, all that these people do. A lot of times it's just a projection of humans wanting perfection, but they know that they can achieve it. Because let's be realistic, we cannot be omnipotent or omniscient, because it's incompatible with our biology. We know that very well. So we tend to project this on the creator, on a possible creator, a possible being, greatest possible being. You get what I'm saying? But I'll be honest to say that this is what I think myself. A lot of times this is a projection of humans wanting perfection into a being, you know what I'm saying? That just because they know that they cannot, the greatest possible being, for example, or the creator, just because they know well that they cannot reach these things. It's unrealistic, it's incompatible with their biology, right? So, but it doesn't always have to be like, I'm just saying like this is possible. I mean, a lot of people could do this. This is just my examination, what I think. But I think a lot of people, they match this, you know what I'm saying? Because they talk about, I mean, they match what I described, because they talk a lot about wanting perfection, like striving for perfection, knowing well that they can't reach it in an absolute sense. Regarding like being able to do everything or reach everything or whatever. But this is a strong sense of perfection, because we are not just talking about human perfection, being perfect according to your biological constraints. We are talking about being perfect according to logic, which is far, far more. But I still want this, to be honest. I mean, who doesn't want absolute power and control? I do. Anyways, if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you're new. And I'm out. Peace.